Morning, church. Sorry to throw you through a loop this morning. Um, we thought we'd do something a little bit different. If you don't like change, it feels a little weird to you, and I can understand that, and I can appreciate that, and I can apologize so much, but I love change, so for the next 4 weeks, this is kind of going to be our setup for a number of reasons I'll get into. Um, I'll tell you why we're going to do that here in just a minute. But one of the things that we talked about when we moved over into this space, when we started talking about what would this space look like on a regular basis if we could, was what would it look like if we just did worship a little differently? What if we set up a little bit differently? What if we brought chairs and tables? And what if we did meals in worship? What if we... So we just thought about all these different things, and when it got down to it, we've just kind of been in this 6 month, the same setup. And in this series, we were like, what if we changed it up a little bit? What if we stepped outside the box? What if we thought about, okay, if we've been talking about using this space differently, what if we actually do this differently? This space allows us to think outside the typical Sunday morning sitting in a pew setup. Today we're going to jump into this series called The River Essentials. This series is going to simply act as our basis for how we will walk people through what we won't call new member class, but that's essentially what you might be able to think about it as. This is what we will walk people through for 4 weeks as they want to jump on board with our church, become a partner with our ministry here at the River Church. When we talked about membership in the last few weeks, really in the last couple of months, we've been talking about what does it look like to be a member of the River Church. And this is what we kind of got around to when we talked about membership. Membership is a weird way to explain what we desire for people here at the River Church. Because membership often requires some sort of transaction, right? If you're a member at the gym, or if you have a membership to Netflix, or if you have a membership to Sock of the Month Club, usually what happens is you pay money and then you get something in return. That's what membership was when we were talking about it around the tables of our leadership and our staff. But we don't want to be a part of a transactional relationship with people. We want to be a part of transformation with people. We want to be a part of restoration with people. We don't want to be a church of have-tos. We want to be a church of get-tos. And membership really just lends itself to really the have-to. Like, well, if I'm a member, then I have to give this, and I have to do that, and then I have to be here. And that's not the kind of relationship that we want to have. We don't want to be a church of have-tos. We want to be a church of get-tos. So when we're talking about membership, we found out that our idea of what membership looked like may look differently than what it may have in the past. You all aren't members of this organization where you give your time and your energy and your resources and you expect something in return. If that is why you're here at church today, I can understand, but that's not what we desire for people. We are all partners in this as we look to extend God's grace and mercy into our community through our church experience. So what we found is we don't really want members. We want to form partnerships where we covenant together to pursue God's given purpose and identity in our community. This isn't really a crazy concept, but it does take a good deal of intentionality. It takes time and effort in order to think differently about how we invite people into this family that Tony said we call the River Church. So for the next 4 weeks, we're going to have conversations, and we're going to work toward being intentional about casting a vision of what it means to covenant together as partners at the River Church in a pursuit of joining with God in what God is doing here in these walls and in these buses and in our community. So in the next 4 weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of unveil our plan for our membership class experience. Or really, we're looking to see how can we walk alongside people to help them understand and to help them to know like what we're ultimately looking for. We don't want members, we want partners. We want partners who covenant together to pursue God's will and God's ways. Well, I've only had a few church member class experiences. Usually what happens at those classes is the church leaders stand up and in front of a room of people who might want to be joining the church, and they just kind of like go and talk about everything under the sun, and Sometimes it's super boring. Like, I love my last church, but we'd sit in a class for 4 hours and like just people talk at you. Al's like, I've been there. I mean, that's usually what happens when you talk about church membership, right? Like, you go, you sit in a class for 4 hours, the pastor or church leader talks for whatever, probably 3 hours and 47 minutes of that, and maybe you get a break in between there. But for us, what we're hoping to do is really flip the conversation. Because membership is like one of these things where I can say, and like, these are the requirements for you. But partnership takes two parties. It takes a give and take. There's a give and take there. There's a conversation to say, like, this is what I feel. How do you feel about it? You all know this. You've had partnerships throughout your lives. You understand this concept. So in this experience, we're not hoping to just like, this is what the River Church is. What we want to do, Al, you're killing me. I love it. Because the River Church is not a set of rules and a set of expectations. The River Church are its people. The River Church is how we express the love of God, the grace of God in our world, not just in these walls, but outside these walls. That's why you're sitting around tables. Because we want this experience to be conversational. And it's going to be weird because you're not used to talking on Sundays. You're used to me just talking at you, and then you're like, oh, okay, now we can go home. No, today, and for the next 4 weeks, 3 weeks, we are going to use this as an opportunity to share with one another. Share life together, share thoughts and dreams. We're going to talk. And we're going to be intentional about this because we want to first share our stories with one another. Next week, we're going to talk about how we share our everyday rhythms together. 2 weeks, we're going to talk about what gets us up in the morning, what gets us excited. And in 3 weeks, we're going to talk about what are those giftings, those passions that God has laid on your heart that is calling you to do something to make a difference in this world in the name of Jesus. And in the same way, we're going to parallel that with the River Church's story today. We're going to talk about next week, we're going to talk about the practices, the everyday rhythms of the River Church. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about our core values, our 3 core values. And in 3 weeks, we're going to talk about what does it look like to lean into gifts and launch those gifts out into the world. This is the format for the next few weeks, and will be the format that we walk people through as they jump in and want to be a part of the River Church. So what you're experiencing for the next 4 weeks, whether you're here or not, this is what you will see if you watch it on YouTube or whatever. This is what you'll see. We are essentially walking you all through a new member class. So if any of you have been members of this church before, great. I'm so happy. We're wiping that away. Because so much has been wiped away in the last 6 months. You don't move spaces, you don't change your model, you don't buy buses, you don't have new faces without having to go like, what does membership look like here? Or what does covenant partnership look like here at the River Church? So if you are members, great. I am so excited for you. If you're not members, if you've been coming, let's face this. When I jumped on board in December 2017, we had about 50 people on Sundays. We've been averaging closer to 70, 75, 80 people. That means somewhere in there we picked up a few people. So if this is your first time ever talking about membership, welcome. I don't know what it was like before, but neither do they. So this is all brand new. And I don't know about you, but that kind of gets me excited. Because there's so much about and we're going to talk about that. There's so much about who we have been that is influencing who we are today, but there's so much more about what is God doing today that's influencing the vision and the direction of our church. And that levels the playing field for all of us to share with one another. Today we're going to be talking about our stories. All of us have a story, a life story, a faith story, a testimony, a family story. And we as a church, we have a story to tell as well. And I'm excited to share with many of you people who have not been here for a very long time. And if this is your first or second or third time, like you're saying, what did I just sign up for? But we have a story too. And there's so many people that I don't think know how many of us were there when this church started. Like how many people actually were in that living room, decided to make the change to say, yeah, we're going to start a church. And I'm excited to share that story with some of you today because a lot of you don't know that story, and I want you to hear that story because that influences who we are today. So before I jump into that, though, this is what we're going to have you do. So on your tables, we have paper, and you can flip those over. I played tic-tac-toe a whole lot over there. But we want you to use the stuff in front of you to be able to interact together and to be able to, say, oh, hey, DJ, find a table, bro. Like, what? There's a table over here. Yeah, sit by yourself. It's cool. So you don't have to use the paper. Some kids like to draw a lot. And if that's you, if you like to doodle, if you like to write poetry, if you have like a life verse, if you just don't want to be paying attention to me this whole time, you just draw, and that's totally cool. But I want to give you a space to say like, oh yeah, that's an interesting thing, or oh, this is a part of my story that I want to tell. But the very first question that I'm going to ask you, and Charlie, you got it on the screen for me? Simply this: what is your first experience of the church? What's the thing that you remember first about the church, or what's your first memory of faith life? And maybe that's like baptism, but just share that with one another. Every time we're going to give roughly like 5 minutes, just for you guys to kind of talk together at your tables. And if I cut you off, please feel free to continue the conversation after. We don't have to be out of here till 1. So. You get family around a table, you talk. That's how it goes. So we'll give you 5 minutes. That's the question that we're going to focus on. Can we get some music up? So I want to tell you the River Church's story. How many of you were sitting in the first meetings of the River Church? Can you raise your hand if you were sitting at the meetings, the first meetings? The Hawkers, the Johnsons. Yep. What is your name, sir? John? John wasn't there. Or you just raising your hand because you're first. Oh no! The first. John, I wouldn't embarrass you, but it's great to meet you, brother. Yeah. That was a bad time. It was more. I was asking the question, who was here? So the Davises, the Hawkers, the Johnsons. It was. Talk to me about that first meeting. Bonnie, there's a microphone right there. Would you mind just just tell me what you were feeling in that first meeting.
Number one, we were in a house, and it was very, very crowded, and everyone was so excited to get a new group together to get started. And with
She's okay.
okay.
You're all right. Don't worry about it.
So anyway. It was just exciting to know that we were following what God was telling us to do and coming together as a group and starting a new ministry.
Yeah, sweet. Chris, could you you don't have to, but can you talk about where you guys met, what you guys did? Would you be willing to do that?
So at the time that was going on, my dad was the principal of at Wood School right outside of Lake Geneva, and that's where we met I'm going to say it was probably a good 6 to 7 months, and we met right in the gym, and then we cut a deal with Williams Bay High School, and they had a really nice auditorium. They had a whole bunch of classrooms that we could use for the kids, and we were there for quite a while. The thing that I remember the most is at that time we had like an old box truck, and we had all this sound equipment, and every week we had a crew of guys that would load, unload, and the beating that our sound equipment took really prompted a lot of people to be like, hey, we gotta find a permanent building. So then finally the theater in Delavan opened up. And that's a whole nother saga that I'll let someone else describe, because
we'll
that was a whole restoration that took forever.
Tony, Ed, could you guys talk about that? And I know a number of you were. Who was there the first year? In the first year of the church? Yeah, it kind of picked up some more people. But just in general, what was that first worship gathering? What did that feel like? Can you just snag the mic quick, and either one, it doesn't matter.
Well, we were coming off of a church split. We were part of Lakeland Community Church, and the church.
You're jumping my
split.
stuff here, Tony.
Okay, so
Come
we
on.
were hungry. We were so hungry to worship the Lord as corporate, because it had been a really long road, and so that very first worship experience was it was just undescribable. We felt that God had a plan for us. We felt that God was with us. We felt that God was moving for us. We felt that it's just so hard to explain because it gets really, really emotional. But we just knew that God had a plan for us, and that this core group of people was going to move forward with God into something great.
Sweet. Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, because although you help form these questions, Tony. So come on, girl, you know how this goes. Don't be jumping my questions. But this is what I've come to know, and we're going to talk about more. We'll talk about that split. We'll talk about the theater here in a minute. But yeah, this is what I've gathered just from the Charlotte put together. Did you put together the newsletter, Charlotte? Were you the one who put the newsletter together? So they put it's like a 12-page newsletter, like front to back, green and mauve, and it was like it was like a book. They wrote a book, and it's just kind of fun to read. I got the first anniversary one, and it's just kind of fun to read through that, just the excitement and the energy that this church started off with. That you can certainly, there are people among you that have a whole lot better picture of what that actually looked like in the very beginning. But it's a really kind of neat story that we'll jump more into. The second question, we want to talk about really defining moments. So for us as a church, we'll talk about the defining moments, being that split from Lakeland, being the acquisition of the theater, and then talking about pastoral transitions a little bit. And I know this is like a super big question for like a 5-minute conversation, but think big here. I'm not looking for and then my fish died. Well, that might have been your defining moment, but talk about things that have really shaped you as a person. Again, if you want to go 1, you can do 2 if your fish died. But just think about, what are those defining moments in your life, and maybe pick 1 and just talk about how that's been defining for you. And 3, 2, 1, hit it. I hope you guys have been able to talk a little bit. So I should interject quick. So in these Covenant Partner Central classes, there will be groups of roughly 4 or 5, not groups of 6 or 7 or 8. Because of what you're probably experiencing. I'm talking really fast, and I can't get everything out, and the last 2 of you can't talk. So just know that in our Essentials class, it will be smaller groups. A lot of this stuff can be talked about a little bit more in depth, as opposed to potentially right now where you're like, and then I got married, and then I went to church, and then I had my kids, and then, oh, that was 5 minutes. Great. I just want to touch on the defining moments for our church. Like Tony said, the split from Lakeland some 16, 17-ish years ago now, that kind of launched the River Church in a whole different direction, as you kind of heard, sitting around and saying, hey, what are we going to do here? We want to be a church. We want to be a family. How are we going to do this? Let's start meeting. They met at Wood School. They met at Williams Bay High School, like Chris said. And then the theater came along. There was a group of people who came around that, prayed on that decision, decided, hey, this is what we'd like to do. How many couples were in that initial group? 7 okay. So there roughly 7 couples from the church, 7 family units of the church decided, hey, let's go in on this building. Let's move on it. They put money down. The church moved into that space, and then one of the defining moment for our church was the effort and energy that was put into making that a space where we could call home. for some 12 years. And again, I'm not going to dive deep into that story, but just know that people were coming off the street to help. That for a good chunk of a year, that space was being renovated and updated, and I mean, because the building just sat empty for a number of years. It was a storage facility for antiques, right, and just garbage. So the people in the church had to move the stuff out, then had to like put it all together, and it was, I mean, it's an incredible story of what God can do through people who don't have the skills to do the things that you have to do. Chris, one of my favorite, is it you, Chris, that like you're the toilet, like you were crushing toilets? Is that?
The sink.
Sinks?
I did the sink.
You did the sink. Chris, what did you do? Okay, good. Toilet. But it's an incredible story of what happens when you get a group of people who just love the Lord to say, this is what the heart of God is right now for us in our body, and this is what we're going to do. And the theater was just a wonderful space for us to be in for a number of years. About 7-ish years ago, though, the initial pastor of the church really started making his way out. He ended up retiring, and that kind of started a transitional time for our church, which really I don't know if it's ended really, but which really brings us to today. For about 6 or 7 years now, we have been full-on transition. And it's kind of fascinating to think about where God has taken us and what God has done. And we're going to jump in that at the very end here. Charlotte, we're going to jump to the last question there. And this is one of those things that is a big question, I know, but how did you get here today? Like, why are you sitting here with us today? Because something brought you in through the doors. What is that reason? So the back end of today, if you need to leave for whatever reason, I feel like we're going to be here just a little bit longer. And if you can't be here, I'm not going to hold that against you much. No. If you just need to take communion, then you can leave. That was touchy. But I want to tell you why we're here, or at least my perception of why we're here. Charlotte and I were standing in the bus with you guys last week, and Charlotte was like, she was in our meeting when we were talking about these questions, and she said, we were talking about like, oh, why is the River Church here? She said, do you remember what you said last week? Like, I don't know. I just talk on Sundays, and I don't remember anything, but this is roughly what I said. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. So this is not normal. None of this is normal, but as I was just telling this table, I was at a very normal church. 2,500 people. I had budget coming on my ears. I could do anything I wanted. I threw the craziest parties for high school students you could imagine. And I was like, there is got to be something different. When I went to seminary, there's got to be something different. There's got to be something that feels more like people are all in on stuff. There's got to be somewhere where it's not so programmatic, where it's not just driven from the top. There has to be a different way of doing this. And when we first jumped in here in 2017, there was something different about this experience. And it wasn't because we were in a theater. It wasn't because it was a smaller church. It was just, there's something about this church that leads me to understand that the church doesn't have to be so high and mighty. It doesn't have to be like this super, like everyone sits in pews and then takes communion, then goes home. There's something different about this experience. The last 6 months have been crazy. The last year has been crazy, almost to the day now, where we sat in a meeting with our elders to say, we are going to do something different. When I first jumped on, the church was going through a capital campaign to raise money for the roof of the theater building. And we raised some $80,000 through mainly 2 large donations. And we were like, okay, great. This is going to be exciting stuff. We're going to be able to put a roof on this building. And something happened in the midst of the conversations that said, what happens if you don't spend the money on the roof, but you turn it around and do something different with it? And we prayed on it, we worked through it, we talked about it. We're like, what happens when we stop paying into a building as our ministry, our main focus of ministry, and what happens when we invest in people? I'm fairly transparent, almost to a fault, but this is the situation. Church, when we were at the theater, our budget was roughly $12,000 a month. We were like barely coming up for air. And about a year ago now, I sat around the table with 25 different people and I said, hey, we don't have enough money to pay the bills this week, this month. What are we going to do? And I said in that meeting, I'm like, I never want to have this conversation again, ever. Because I didn't sign up for this job to ask people for money. That is not my heart. That's not what I like. I could care less about money. But when you are kind of the head of the organization and you look at your staff and you go like, I don't know if we can pay you this week, something's wrong. So in the midst of that conversation, we said we have to talk about this differently because we cannot be mortgage poor. We cannot be so underwater that we have to keep coming to people and go like, nope, that's not enough. You have to give more. So we made a decision. Let's shift away from this model and let's embrace something that we don't really know a whole lot about. Because we had the $80,000 in the bank, we were able to think about stuff like that bus, like this setup, like that bus, like these TVs, like these walls that we move around, like this marketing stuff. Like we were able to think like what would happen if we leveraged our resources to being more active and doing stuff as opposed to just paying for a space to meet in 4 times a month. I'll tell you now, I talked to Jonathan last week. Jonathan's the head of our stewardship team. Our budget right now is roughly $8,300 a month. That means we're not looking at each other around those tables going, what are we going to do, church? Like, we need more money, church. We're looking at each other and we're saying, for the very first time, at least from what I've been hearing, we're weeks ahead of our bills. And that's not to mean to like, offering is not important. Please don't hear me when I'm like, oh, you don't have to give. No. Yeah. Because I don't want to step back, but I need you to hear this very clearly. Our budget was close to $12,000 where we were 7 months ago. Our budget now is roughly $8,300 a month. That's huge. We're able to start thinking about, and Bonnie can certainly attest to this, and Jean, they're on our stewardship team, and you know what they've had to worry about? Like, what's the bill that we have to like delay paying? How long can we go before this clears? Can we make payroll? For the very first time, and we've sat in meetings and we're like, okay, what happens when we don't have to just pay bills, but we can be stewards of the things that God has given? What happens, church? When I know like we set up and we tear down and you're like, this is kind of annoying that we have to share this space and like we drive this bus in and we pull it out and it's not as cool as much as to have our space. But for the very first time, we're not thinking about how do we just pay bills. We're thinking about how can we be good stewards of what we have been given. Church, that's important for us to understand. That this bus, that our model that we're starting to lean into, even though it might be a little cumbersome sometimes, it allows us to think about how do we not just do church on Sundays, but how are we the church every single day in every single place? We're leveraging things like this bus. Renz is taking it out and showing it off to people. We're gonna pimp out this bus, and it's gonna be freaking awesome. It's gonna be great, and inside it, like we're hoping to do awesome things with this, not only for our kids, but to potentially do food distributions with that bus. Around our area and around our county, church, we have the ability to do things that God has called us to do. Not just be in a place on Sunday mornings where people come to us. We have the potential to go to people differently than we've ever been before. So why are we here today? It's because we want so desperately to do and practice the ways of Jesus together. And we believe that we have more of an opportunity to do that when we're not just sitting in a building going like, why aren't people coming to us? No, we have the ability to say, how do we go to people? We've not been in that place to be able to say, let's use our resources and our time and our energy to go out and do that. But we are sitting there and we're talking about that for the very first time in my time being here at the River Church. So why are we here today? It's because we want to fulfill and pursue the ways of God together. We want to lean into this family experience. I've told a lot of people, I'm not looking to build this church. If this is all we have and we're just building people up and people come in and we're like, okay, we're going to equip you to go out and be Jesus' hands and feet in the world, that's okay by me. I'm all about multiplying. I could care about addition. I don't want this building to be full. I want to eventually push it and go like, where else can we do this? Because Jesus wasn't about like adding, Jesus was about multiplying. And when we understand that each of you, all of you, have the ability to be ministers and pastors and evangelists and shepherds and teachers in the world, and it just doesn't have to be me, church, that is where we can blow up. That's what God wants from us. God wants us to multiply our gifts. God doesn't just want us to like build our gifts for our kingdom. This is exciting stuff. So why are we here today? And I don't know why you're here today, but why I'm here today is because there's something about this experience that makes no sense in my brain, and yet we're just rolling right along because God says, hey, buy a bus. And we bought a bus. And now we're in a position to think, what else can we do? That's exciting for me. I don't know what else I was going to say, but I do. I want to leave you with John chapter 17, because I think this is great. This is Jesus' prayer for people. He says this, my prayer is not for them alone. He's not just talking about the disciples. I pray for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you had sent me and have loved them even as you loved me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you, and they know that you have sent me. I have made you known to them and will continue to make you known, in order that the love that you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. Church, understand this. Our DNA is of God. God's love is shown through our love. God's grace is shown through our grace. God's forgiveness is shown through how we forgive. God's story is known through our story. God's story is woven so intricately through our stories, the good and the bad parts, the things that are beautiful and the things that are ugly, especially as a part of our church. We know a lot of beautiful and we know a lot of ugly. But God works through it all. When we share our stories like we have today, we have the potential to show the world that God's story is not about transaction. It's not about a membership. It's about partnership. God's story is so carefully and wonderfully woven into our story. And that's important for us to understand, so that we might then weave and transform using God's grace. All who interact with us may know Jesus, and that is our calling, church. I have 3 things that I need to tell you before I leave. First, the first is Tuesday. I really would love, it's just an open forum. There we're going to share our budget. We're going to share some constitutional things. I know, real fun stuff. But it really is an opportunity for you to ask any questions or inquire about anything that's happening with the church. It will be just a great time. Just sit down and talk about where we are. If you have questions about where we are, come on. The second thing I want to talk about is our elders. So as I've been talking about, 3 of our elders are stepping off the team, and over the course of the last couple of weeks, our elder team has talked to 3 other people to jump on our team. Kate is going to be one of our elders stepping up. Jeff is hanging out on the bus. And Jeff Asson, he is going to be one of our elders. And then Jim Beal is also going to be one of our elders. So, praise God. And the third thing I have to tell you, so, oh shoot, this is going to get crazy. So about a year ago, Sarah and I, we jumped into adoption process with a group out of Atlanta who is working with agencies across the country. About a month ago, we got a call, and our baby girl is born. She's no later than September 25th. It was crazy because I got done with talking about lament, and on Monday, we got a call. So I guess it is true you can push the right buttons, and God responds. So next week, Jesse and Sean are going to take a vacation. Sarah and I will be leading worship with the team. But then a week from then, we're planning to leave for Utah, and we'll be gone for 5 or 6 weeks. But I won't preach now for 8 weeks, and we have a team of people between Rachel and Tony and Kate, and Ryan Benchmer is going to be here a couple weeks, and Chris is going to preach. So you guys are going to be in good hands. We'll be here as long as we don't get a call, and if we do, we're going to Utah. And God listens to prayers, people. This is incredible stuff, and we're so excited that this is the family that we get to bring her home to. So, so praise God. Go with these words. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine on you, be gracious to you. May the Lord look upon you with favor and grant you his peace. Church, thank you so much for today. We'll see you soon.